My name is Nika, and I'll be talking about Michael Foucault's History of Sexuality, Volume 1, Part 3, which explores the development of sex as a problem of truth. Foucault argues that discourse on sexuality became increasingly scientific in the 19th century, with morality and scientific speculation going hand in hand. Sex was no longer viewed solely in terms of morality under this framework, but also in terms of knowledge, truth, and falsehood. Despite the commitment to revealing the truth of sex, 19th century science displayed a refusal to deal directly with sex. The study of human sexuality had little to do with the already established biological sciences, such as the science of animal and plant reproduction, and new scientific information was often skewed to fit a confessional structure. For example, doctors at a mental hospital in Paris produced studies that were aimed at getting to the bottom of what is causing their patients to act in what they thought was an abnormal way. They believed that sexual deviances were the cause of these abnormalities and wanted to find the truth. Foucault argues that there was a clash between producing the truth of sex while at the same time preserving public morality. As with the experiments mentioned earlier, information regarding explicit sexual desires or thoughts was left out of public reports to protect society. To understand this contradiction better, Foucault looks at how other cultures have dealt with the truth of sex. Cultures of ancient Rome, China, Japan all treat sex as ars erotica, or erotic art, whereas we in the modern West deal with it as a scientia sexualis, or the science of sexuality. The ars erotica, or erotic art, deals with a knowledge of sensual pleasure, and it places an emphasis on experience. A kind of secrecy evolves around this knowledge, and it can only be passed from an experienced subject to a novice. In the West, and in the science of sexuality, the truth of sex was discovered less through experience and more through rigorous examinations. Thinkers like Freud wanted to connect each part of our psychology to our relationships with sex, and a fundamental part of this was confessional practices. Confession was seen as a way of finding truth and a form of liberation from powers that repress us. Sex is a special theme in confession because it is generally something hidden, a secret that has to be drawn out. This is why the act of confessing was often seen as therapeutic. The science of sexuality put the confession ritual at the center of its production of knowledge, and it put the patient in a position of submission relative to the person asking the questions. Not only is it fundamentally based on a power imbalance, but the confession also forced the patient to seek validation from the person in power. Psychiatrists and other doctors adopted many of the practices of confession into a clinical context, creating a kind of science of confession. Foucault lists 5 ways in which confession is displayed in modern scientific practices. The first involved codified methods, including examination, hypnosis, and free association, developed by medical institutions and doctors to encourage people to talk about sex, but in a clinical and regulated manner. Second was the belief that sexual deviance can have extensive consequences for society beyond what we're able to comprehend. The potential danger of unaddressed sexuality emphasized the need for expert intervention and analysis. Third was seeing a person's sexuality as extremely ingrained in their subconscious to a point where they may not be fully aware of the scope of their own sexual desires and motivations. Thus, a confession expert is necessary to fully uncover the nature of one's sexuality. Fourth, as medical professionals gained more knowledge about people's hidden sexual desires, these experts gained exclusive power in uncovering the truth about a person's sexuality. This creates a space where these experts are seen as authorities on secret desires. Fifth, because there was less of a focus on morality and more of a focus on what is normal or abnormal, the act of confession was seen as a therapeutic way to treat abnormal thoughts. This legitimized confession as a medical procedure. Overall, the science of sexuality system restructures the erotic art system by shifting the authority of who holds the power to produce the truth about sex. Instead of the practiced master of the erotic art who obtains sexual knowledge through personal experience, who is in power changes. In the science of sexuality system, the authority is transferred to the observant scientist who obtains knowledge by examining and analyzing others. This ties to the beginning of Foucault's argument, which says that sexual discourse is still very regulated and closed off. According to Foucault, discourse on sex is not necessarily freeing, as talking about sex does not necessarily make sex better. Sexuality has been regulated and controlled throughout history, and it is not as progressive as we think. Even though discourse around sex may change over time, the negative connotations tied to sex itself will remain. Foucault argues that the discourse around sex is often negative, with sex being associated with sin and shame. This negativity is deeply ingrained in our culture and language, making it difficult to create a truly open and inclusive discourse around sexuality.